He left early in the morning. The pack was light enough that he barely felt it, made out of canvas and leather, packed with a few days of food, and a bedroll strapped across the top. The mountain road was clear, and the air was cold. He moved well. His stride was long, and his shoulders set level. The first village was 3 days in. An older woman met him at the edge of the road. Her son had gone ahead the previous season and never returned. She had a bundle wrapped in cloth. Letters, she said, documents and things that needed to reach him but could not make the journey herself. It was not heavy, so he took it without hesitation. The road climbed. More villages followed, and more requests. A merchant whose cart had broken down asked him to carry a crate of iron fittings to a buyer 2 villages over. A farmer pressed a sack of grain into his hands, a debt owed to a man in the village below, and a woman at a crossroads gave him a box sealed with a cord and asked him to deliver it without opening it and without asking questions. He said yes each time, because he was strong enough to say yes, because the weight was manageable, because refusing felt like a kind of failure, and he was not a man who failed at things he was physically capable of doing. He stopped noticing the adjustments, the slight forward lean that began somewhere in the second week, the way his thumbs hooked under the shoulder straps to redistribute the load, the shorter steps, the pauses at the crests of rises that had not been necessary before. He told himself this was just the nature of mountain travel. The road was long, the gradient was steep, and any man would slow. Months passed. He did not count them carefully. There were more villages, and even more requests. Some were simple, a parcel, a message, a small wooden crate. Others were harder to categorize. But he took them. He took them all, and did not ask. The pack had changed shape without his noticing. Additional bundles were lashed to the outside. The bedroll was buried somewhere beneath layers he could no longer easily identify. And when he stopped for the night, he did not fully remove the pack anymore, only loosened the straps, leaned it against whatever surface was nearby, ate quickly, slept lightly, and in the morning, he would put it back on before he was fully awake. The motion had become automatic. He moved differently now. His head sat forward of his shoulders, and his jaw was set. When other travelers passed him on the road and offered a word of greeting, he answered in single syllables. Not from rudeness, he told himself, from concentration. The road required concentration. The load required management, and he did not have the surplus for conversation. Years passed the way distance passed under a heavy load. Not quickly, not slowly, simply grinding. He reached the high pass one grey afternoon. The wind came across the exposed rock in long flat sheets. He stopped at the highest point and stood with his hands braced against his knees, his breathing loud in his own ears. Below him, on both sides, the road descended. He had forgotten somewhere along the journey what waited at the end of it. He knew there was a destination. He had known it clearly once. He straightened slowly. The pack shifted. Something near the bottom knocked against his lower back. A hard corner, something dense. He did not know what it was. He could not remember when he had taken it on. He stood upright for the first time in a long time. His shoulders ached with the unfamiliarity of the position. The wind moved across the pass. He just stood there. Most men carry more than they were given. They carry what was done to them, what was taken, what was never explained, and after long enough, they stop noticing the weight. A man does not arrive at exhaustion suddenly. He arrives the way a road climbs, gradually, almost imperceptibly, one small addition at a time. The lean that begins in his posture, the shorter stride, the pauses at crests that were not necessary before. He tells himself this is just the nature of the journey, that any man would slow under these conditions, that the gradient is steep and the distance is long, and this is simply what travel costs. He does not consider that some of what he is carrying was placed there by other hands. Life does not ask permission before it applies pressure. It wears at a man the way weather wears at stone, slowly, without malice, without awareness of what it is undoing. The compassion he once had does not disappear in a moment. It thins. It becomes harder to summon, harder to sustain. This is not weakness. It is a predictable result of sustained load. There is something worth understanding here. A man who has been worn down is not a lesser man. He is a man who has been under pressure for a long time without adequate repair. The two are not the same, but they are easy to confuse, especially from the inside. What happened to a man is not what he is. The events are real. The damage is real. The cost was real. But cost does not create character. It only creates conditions. What is built inside those conditions, that is where character lives. Damage is far more common than most men admit. 1 in 4 people currently carries a diagnosable mental illness. This is not a fringe statistic. That is the shape of the world a man moves through every day. Add to that the weight of physical injury, financial collapse, the end of a marriage, chronic illness, and abuse sustained in silence for years before it was even understood or named. Most men are not carrying one wound. They are carrying several, layered, compounded, and often unexamined. The mind adapts. This is its strength and its danger. When load increases, the mind finds ways to manage it. It creates habits. It builds routines. It develops postures, internal and physical, that distribute the weight well enough to keep moving. And for a time, this works. The vigilance keeps a man safe. The control keeps him functional. And the armor keeps the most vulnerable parts protected long enough for him to survive. But adaptation is not resolution. The habit formed under pressure does not dissolve when the pressure lifts. It stays. It becomes part of how the man stands, how he speaks, how quickly he closes long after the original threat is gone. The posture remains, still performing a function it was built for in a different life. This is not failure. It is the cost of having survived. The confusion comes when the adaptation is mistaken for identity, when the vigilance starts to feel like just who he is, when the man can no longer tell the difference between the weight he chose to carry and the weight that was placed on him without consent. Pain has a gravity. It pulls explanation towards it. It offers a story that makes sense of things. The story is coherent. It holds together, and because it costs a great deal to build, the mind assigns it a value. But cost does not equal worth. A wound carried a long time is still a wound. The years do not transform it. Rehearsal does not refine it, and repetition only deepens the groove. There is a harder question underneath all of this. Not just how much a man is carrying, but whose weight it actually is. Some of what a man carries was genuinely his, earned through choices made, consequences accepted, responsibility taken on with clear eyes. That weight belongs to him, and it is appropriate that he bears it. But some of it was handed to him by people who could not carry it themselves, pressed into his hands at a moment when he was strong enough to take it, and because he was strong, he did without asking whether he should, without examining whether the load was ever his to accept. Strength, in a man who has not yet learned its limits, functions as consent. If he can carry it, he will. If he can bear it, he does. And over time, the distinction between chosen burden and inherited burden disappears entirely. He forgets what the pack felt like when it was his alone. He forgets that he was once light. What does transform the load is what the man chooses to do inside the conditions it created. This is the only ground available. Control is not seized in a single act. It is practiced in the small decisions, the studied response, the directed attention, the moment where a man notices what his mind is doing and chooses whether to follow it or redirect it. There are 3 domains that require that discipline. The first is the inner life, how a man thinks, relates, and manages a distance between impulse and action. The second is his material circumstances, the study of how resources are built and maintained, not by luck, but by applied attention. And the third is his physical condition, the body that carries everything else and is the first thing that shows when the load has been mismanaged. None of these areas improve by accident. They respond to study, to deliberate practice, to the willingness to take the portion of responsibility that belongs to a man, even a small portion, and work it seriously. Especially a small portion, because a man who waits until fault is fully resolved before he begins to move will wait a very long time. The load does not have to be permanent. Some of it was never his to carry, but the portion that is genuinely his, the one that can be governed, not denied, not explained away, and not performed into silence, but governed, can be set down with intention and picked back up only when chosen. That is the difference between a man ruled by his history and a man who has placed his history in its correct position, behind him, informing him, but not leading him.